Let my prayer arise in us.
You are listening to part 3 of 5 of The Path to Prayer, Do Not Resent, Do Not React, Be Still, the lecture series by Father Jonah Paffhausen. The series of lectures was recorded at St. Mark's Orthodox Church in Irvine, California on December 1st and 2nd, 2007 by IconNewMediaNetwork.com. If you enjoy this lecture, please consider a donation to the Monastery of St. John of San Francisco. You can contact the monastery at www.monasteryofstjohn.org. Thank you for listening.
So I hope people are, you all are thinking of some questions, okay? Those questions are very helpful. So let's, during the course of the talk, think about some questions, maybe jot them down or something like that, and so that we can have a little kind of discussion at the end. I think for those who were at the lecture last night, you could tell that there's this extremely important interrelationship between not resenting and not reacting. You see how a lot of resentments are basically about our reactions. It's our reaction to when somebody hurts us or offends us or does something or says something or that, and we allow ourselves to react. This principle of non-reaction is something that is very, very deep within the tradition. And what it does is it touches on the whole idea of what the passions are. Because what the passions are is our habitual reactions to certain kinds of stimuli. In other words, if we have a habit of reacting in a certain way, that becomes almost automatic. It becomes something that we passively experience. Because the word passion and the word passive are actually very closely related. It's not something that we intentionally think about. It's something that just seems like it's natural, that it's just a part of our very being, that we react in a certain way when somebody does or says something, and we take offense. But the teaching of the Fathers is that we do not have to react, and that we can learn to not react. No matter how deeply, over how many years that habitual reaction is ingrained in us, we can roll it back. And that's why a lot of what this really is about is learning how to be very conscious of of what's going on in our minds, conscious of what's going on in our hearts, of how and especially trying to maintain consciousness of God, trying to maintain that conscious awareness of the presence of God. Because if we're doing that, it's not only is it something that will prevent all sorts of sins and reactions, and but even as St. Benedict says, we can take our thoughts and shatter them on the presence of God. Now, our task in doing this is first, of course, to deal with our resentments. And you'll see how both of these things, learning not to react as well as not to resent, are also deeply rooted in a practice of inner prayer, of inner silence, and of contemplative prayer, which is at the very core of the tradition. In other words, it's called hesychasm. In other words, the practice of stillness. Because it's basically only from the perspective of that stillness that we are able to be conscious enough to see the thoughts that are coming and block our reaction to them. Now, this process, it sounds hard. It's a little hard to learn initially, but once you've learned it, you find that it's the very dynamic of the whole spiritual discipline of the church. This is the core of what the teaching is in the Fathers. It's important to deal with the resentments first and foremost, because what the resentments do is they are the results of our past habitual reactions. In other words, if we've been hurt or we've been abused or if we've been, offended or something, and we've nurtured these resentments, which are then fed by our pride and by our vainglory and by our self-justification, and all of these other layers of sin and passions. What these resentments do is that they not only block our consciousness of God, but they also produce thoughts. And all of that stuff, even if it's not even conscious, even if it's below the, if it's subconscious, below the level of our kind of functional awareness, when that stuff gets keyed off, it produces a reaction. That's what one of the things we were talking about last night, where we can see sometimes that our reactions to things become completely out of proportion to the stimulus. Say somebody pushes you out of line in the grocery store, or cuts ahead of you, and all of a sudden you find yourself just raging at him. Well, there's probably something from your past that's keying off of, and it's material that's not been dealt with. And so we have to go through this process in order to move into an awareness of ourself, where we can get enough inner perspective to stop the reaction, because otherwise our life is just lived in a purely reactive way. Somebody says something, we say something back, or does something, and we react back, and we're actually allowing ourselves to be manipulated in every aspect of our life. And what that means is that we have no control over ourselves. We have no control over our life. You see a risque image, and all of a sudden you're lusting. You see somebody that hurt you, and all of a sudden you're enraged. You turn on the radio and listen to one of the political advertisements for any of the given candidates, and all of a sudden you're enraged. Of course, that may not be such a bad thing. Or turn on the news. That may also not be a bad thing. We'll have to think about this maybe. But if we're just reacting, we have no interior peace. And not only do we have no interior peace, we have no grasp on our deep self. And that's why when all of these reactions are coming up all of the time, it's keying off so much pain, so much of that inner hurt, so much of that deep sense of emptiness, of desolation, of despair, because we don't have any grip on ourselves. So, how do we do this? The second and third principle, non-reaction and inner stillness, go deeply together. And then another aspect of this, which deals actually with all three, is the practice of confession, and that's going to be a kind of a major section in this as well. Because confession is the primary way in the Orthodox Church that we deal with our own resentments, that we deal with our sins, that we clear ourselves of all of this garbage that we've allowed to accumulate in the past, and that we allow the grace of God to enter into our minds and into our hearts to heal us. The principle of non-reaction means that when somebody does something or somebody says something, even if it's directly meant to hurt you or directed against you, means that you can simply step back and not react. We can do this. I know you're shaking your head no, but we can do this. It means because what is our reaction? First thing, somebody says something. Our reaction is our reaction in thought. And even if it's lightning fast, we still have the ability to say, I don't have to react. I don't have to respond immediately to this. I can step back and not allow myself to be hurt, not allow myself to be angry, or rather, shall we say, allow myself to not be angry, allow myself to not be hurt, allow myself to not react. Why should I give this person control over me? Because when we react, and I mean this kind of thoughtless reaction of just, punching back, essentially, we're allowing that person, the other person, to manipulate our reaction, to manipulate us. I don't know about you, but I don't like to be manipulated. Okay? It's a matter of stepping back and maintaining our peace and maintaining our composure, and not allowing ourselves to react, either physically to punch back or in thought. Very often our reaction is if somebody says something hurtful or does something obnoxious or whatever, that we allow ourselves. We may not react in thought, or we may not react in action. We may not punch them. Most likely we don't. But we then allow ourselves to we think about it and we turn it over and over, and why did he do that, and why did she say that, and what's wrong with me that somebody would say that, and on and on and on and on, and we develop these resentments and this bitterness and objectify the person, and that person becomes a distant object rather than the beloved friend who probably didn't mean to offend us in the first place. Or maybe they did, but maybe they were having a bad day. We don't know. I'll break for questions, okay? So the first level of non-reaction is don't punch them. Second level is don't say anything. Third level is don't think about it. Don't turn it over and over and over in your mind and let a resentment against that person, a judgment, a criticism grow up in your heart, by which you distance and objectify and distance yourself from that person. And in doing so, you give yourself enough space interiorly to think about what is a constructive response. Maybe they talk about this in modern psychology about mirroring, right? It says, if you're in an argument with somebody, they say one of the best things to do is to step back and say, when you say this, I feel like that. In other words, it's a reasoned, dispassionate response. And what this whole process does is it brings us greater and greater control over ourselves, over our thoughts, and eventually over our emotions, over our feelings, so that we can be in control of ourselves in whatever situation we find ourselves. This is very important. Because otherwise, there's no peace, right? There's no peace. We always find ourselves distracted by all of these, these things that are going on, and life just becomes one big drama. Well, life is not supposed to be a big drama like that. As Orthodox Christians, our whole point is to be conscious of God and the remembrance of God. And if we're all caught up, you might as well have the Lifetime channel or something going on 24 hours a day. Where it's one drama after another, one more emotional manipulation after another. Now, when we are striving to do this, the first and most important thing is to remember, I don't need to react. I don't need to react. And we always have plenty of opportunities for practice, right? And think about how much more peaceful and joyful life would be if you don't react. Now, the Fathers talk about this whole process in relation to thoughts. Because sometimes we find ourselves reacting not just when we're in an argument with somebody, but thoughts can come from a whole variety of different things. It can be something that a memory that occurs. It can be something we see in passing. It can be something from our interaction with other people. It can be like on TV or radio or whatever. What do we do with that? The Fathers talk about that initial thought that comes into our mind as a provocation. It can be from any of these sources. It can be demonic also. But I'd rather not go into blaming the devil. St. James says, we're tempted by our own passions and desires. We don't need to blame the devil. He can just sit back and watch. And then he's the one who turns on the drama channel. The provocation comes, and our mind, we're used to just kind of going on the short circuit to a reaction. But there's a whole process that goes on when a thought comes into our mind. That initial impetus is the provocation. Then our mind starts kind of looking at it and seeing what it is and makes a decision whether to examine it further. And then comes a decision to say, okay, I'm going to assent to this thought. I'm going to turn it over. and then we agree with it and start really thinking about it. We start playing with it, and then it starts playing with us. And then we make a decision, yes, I'm going to agree with this, or I'm going to throw it out. But if we agree with it, then and carry out the action, and we do this multiple times, it becomes a habit. And after doing it so many times, it becomes something, and it becomes an automatic reaction, which is what a passion is. Now, let's for example, look at ads on TV. Okay, 95% of the ads, right? We just let them go. You know, we don't even think about them. We use the mute button. We turn the channel. You know, whatever happens. So, you know, because you're not going to go out and buy all that stuff, right? Think of what would happen if you went out and bought all of the stuff that you see advertised in just a couple of hours. You know, it'd be crazy. So we know how to do this. So the ad on TV is like a provocation. And immediately we know how to ignore it, right? For the most part. But there are those things that really kind of catch us. You know, maybe they're using some really kind of, provocative kind of model or something like that to do the advertising. You know, maybe maybe it's keying off something that we really had been thinking about, we really want to do, or it plays on some other passion. And so those are the ads that really catch our attention, right? You know, maybe we've been thinking about getting a new car because, my car, it's old and it's ugly and it's beat up and it's got problems and it's costing me more money, and on and on and on. And we see this new car that we think we can afford and that's cute and and it's powerful and it's got this great looking model, and on and on and on. Well, that's the ad that's going to catch our attention. And so we start playing with it. We think, well, maybe I should, and then they advertise, this 0% financing for 84 months or whatever, It's only a $150,000 car, but anyway, but who cares, it's 0% financing, right? And so it gets us going, and we're really thinking about it, and it's really, and then, then we make a decision. Okay, I'm going to go and look, and then something in us says, wait a second, $150,000 at 84 months. That's over $2,000 a month. I can't afford that. Okay, maybe a little sense creeps in, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't, and so, or maybe it's a $15,000 car at 84 months at 0%, and I think, I can afford that, and so you run out and buy the car. Well, there's nothing wrong with buying the car, but this is, and the reality is, there's nothing wrong with this process of thought. This is just a description of the process itself, but if you went out and you bought every car that attracted your attention, unless you've got multi-gazillion dollars, you're probably not going to be able to keep up that habit for very long, right? But if it becomes something that you can't control, think about gambling, okay? You see the ad on TV for this, this casino, and they've got 5,000 slot machines and everything you ever wanted in your life, and millions of dollars, and on and on and on, and so it keys off the thought, and you start thinking about it, and you start thinking about, I really need to get away. It'd be really nice to go out there, out into the middle of nowhere, to this Indian reservation, to this beautiful hotel, and and then you start thinking about the money, and the money's always there, and it's keyed off your whole passion of avarice, right? and I could really use some more money, and I really want the money, and I can win all this money, and you don't realize that very few people win any money when they go to these places, Usually costs a lot more to go to these places, but, that little bit of common sense may or may not creep in. And so you're thinking about it, and you're thinking about it, and you've got a day off, and off you go. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But if it becomes if every time this thought of gambling comes in, and pretty soon what's going to happen is you become addicted to it. It becomes a way in which you are. In which you keep yourself distracted from the other things that you have to deal with in life, some of which are probably not too pleasant, and this idea that I can win all of this money, just blots out the reality that you just spent your paycheck, you just spent the mortgage payment, you just spent the food money, and you don't know how you're going to get home because you just had to mortgage your car. You had to give over your car because all you want to do is win this jackpot, and you've bankrupted your family. Now that's bad. That's really bad. But this is how the passions work. Okay? We have these ideas that we react to. And anywhere along that road, from the moment you see the ad on TV, and whether it's on TV or whether it's just a thought that flicks through your mind, from the moment that provocation comes to the moment you fulfill that thought by action, you can cut off the process. You can get in the car and be driving down the freeway and say, wait a second, I can't afford to go gambling today. I'm going to get fired. Maybe a little common sense creeps in. Or, I don't want to go get a new car. I just bought one yesterday. I don't need to do that. And that's passion. Or, I don't need to go out. I don't want to go out and get drunk. I will get sick and it will be miserable, and I'm destroying my life by alcohol. That's another way of dealing with this. But it's any of the passions, any of the thoughts. Pornography. It's a huge one today, but it's not just these addictive behaviors either. It can be, I don't want to go and have a bad interaction with this person in the office or at church or at home, and so I'm going to stop myself. We can do that, and I'm going to change and we can decide to change our thinking. I'm not going to allow myself to resent that person anymore. I'm going to ask their forgiveness and repent, and see if we can restore the relationship. This basic principle of non-reaction is something that applies to every aspect of our life, because it's all about, how do we deal with the thoughts that are constantly running through our mind? We can be standing in church and thinking about the grocery list. But if we allow ourselves to obsess about it, we're going to take off as soon as we possibly can, even in the middle of the service, and go out and get that thing that but is that what we want to be doing? In other words, or, we can go to work and have this horrible relationship with our boss who we resent terrifically, and are we going to go and antagonize them so that we get into a fight? I don't think so. If we can respond, if we can respond in a constructive way by not letting our thoughts control and manipulate us. So is it clear how resentments and non-reaction are related to one another? Okay. So you had a question earlier. Could you go to the mic, please?
Oh, sure. Years ago, there was this madman named L. Ron Hubbard who wrote these books.
Yep.
And called Dianetics, and all he spoke about was the commercial was don't have a reactive mind or beat the reactive mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Is this kind of the orthodox answer to kind of what you're talking about here?
Well, all I know of L. Ron Hubbard is that I've driven by the complex where his corpse lies on the Lost Coast up in Northern California, where it's guarded with guards with machine guns. This vault in God only knows why. This is the patristic theology. Okay, this is basically right out of the Philokalia in a kind of in modern language. So I would assume that maybe. And what in reality, most of this is basically just common sense. You just have to think, think it through. So it's not exactly all that obscure. But you could say that, yes, this would be the orthodox answer to, Scientology or whatever. Mary.
There's an aspect of non-reaction
Mm-hmm.
that I see as ignoring, and I don't know how that fits in.
Mm-hmm.
The example I can think of is myself. If I'm speaking with somebody and I don't understand their thought process,
Mm-hmm.
I will ignore them.
Mm-hmm.
Not only then, but thereafter.
Ah.
It just bothers me that I can't follow them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that almost seems like a not a good reaction.
And that's a reaction.
Right.
Exactly. Precisely.
Right.
And so I think the real task is to see that that's a reaction. And instead of allowing yourself to react that way, say, I don't understand what you're talking about. Please, can you back up and put this in different words? Something like that. I think you see, what this is about, it doesn't mean to ignore people or to ignore an interaction. It means to take it and use it constructively instead of creating a resentment or instead of allowing it to become a passion. Which means instead of allowing ourselves to react sinfully. It's a good thing to respond in a constructive way. Thoughtfully and not coming from and not emotionally, but in a constructive way that will edify and build up both people. But the reactions when they're sinful are things that break down our relationships, and they lead to resentments, and that leads to a breakdown of our relationship with God. So, does that make sense?
To a point. I'm thinking of the example you gave yesterday of the hierarch who left, after a person came and said they didn't agree with what the fathers say, and he just left, his position and moved on to something else. I'm almost thinking that, is that something he did? Like, I don't want to deal with this kind of thinking, this kind of I don't know. I'm just wondering if that's anything similar. Or maybe you can draw the distinction.
Well, certainly we can say that St. Isaac reacted. But as a result, he was able to become a hermit and to write all of these things, which he's probably one of the few saints that's accepted throughout the entire Christian world. Here he was, a bishop of the Church of the East, right? And the so-called Nestorians, but he's accepted in the Greek Orthodox world. He's accepted in the non-Chalcedonian so-called Monophysite Orthodox world. He's accepted by the Catholics and venerated by the Catholics, even in Protestant circles. So, pretty unusual. I mean, even St. Francis doesn't have that kind of acceptance throughout the whole Christian world. So, saints, so God uses our sins sometimes for His providence. So I don't know if Saint Isaac would have been able to write if he'd stayed as a bishop, which is basically an administrator,
I have two questions. I guess they're on topic, but they may not be related. One is, now that I have a few kids, I'm wondering, is there anything practical I can do to help instill this type of way of living in my children? Or what would be a way practically that I could help teach them not to react?
Well, I think the best thing is to model it yourself. Mm-hmm. If they're doing if they're being naughty, if they're doing something, that deserves punishment, do it in a thoughtful and constructive manner rather than just lashing out in anger. Mm-hmm. It's always better to step back. If a kid's going to light something on fire, or put his hand on the stove or something like that, you pull it off and slap it, right? But that's not out of anger. That's out of love, and they have to realize that. You have to help them to realize that. But in yourself, never react in anger. Always step back and cool down and then address it. And I think that would model for them, especially once they get a little bit older and they can perceive what you're doing, that would model for them that you don't just snap back passionately, but rather that you look at it and see what's the most constructive way of dealing with this in a way that builds up rather than destroys and tears down.
Thank you. My second question is more having to do with like man and wife relationships. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I notice that I may do something that may cause my wife to react, even though I didn't feel I was intentionally, I didn't want her to react. I didn't think I was trying to hurt her, but I may hurt her and she reacts towards me. As the person who's doing the offending or causing the other person to react, what can I do to assist them or to help undo that situation I may have created, whether I desired to create it or not?
Well, one of the most important things is always to say, please forgive me. Okay? That in the monastery they say that you only need to know two words. One is bless and the other is forgive. Okay? You don't need to know any other words. But in any relationship, forgiveness is always critical because there's always going to be misunderstandings and other things. Now, one of the things that's very important is our reactions are our own. Somebody can be the proximate cause of a reaction, but you made me do this is a false statement. It's a false statement. You made me feel this way. No. You did this, and my reaction was that I felt this way. You did this, and my reaction was that I did this in return. That's a true statement. We are responsible for ourselves. We're responsible for our lives. We're responsible for our reactions. when we get into these, when we get into fight or something, or disagreement, or interchange, where it's just reaction, opposing reaction, you got to stop it. Otherwise, it's going to just destroy the relationship. And so the thing is, you have to step back and say, if I caused offense, please forgive me. Let's stop this and let's think about what are we doing here? How are we doing this? Why are we in this kind of fight or disagreement or whatever it is? And then you can look at it in a rational and a constructive way. And if you hurt her feelings, beg forgiveness. Humility is another thing that's absolutely critical for us, and especially in our most valued and intimate relationships. That humility, that constant asking of forgiveness.
I just wanted to make a comment about what I think is helpful with children, too, is that finally we have a lot of books about the lives of saints, and I think, helping them understand those heroes of the church, because they certainly have plenty, that they see on TV. I think that helps with, helping them understand that aspect of the church life.
Exactly.
Abba Jonah, actually, I would like to thank you so much about this impressive teaching. It's helping us, and I know it's helping me to know how I'm created, soul, body, and spirit. There was a book in the market lately called Secret, which talks a lot about constructive thinking and positive thinking. And I would like to know if you have an idea about this book. Does it line up with our Christian life? Is it really uplifting, or it's not? But you sound like you talk about the same ideas that book was telling us about. And I know with the thinking and the mind, it's very important that if we are in the Word of God, there's so much thinking in Proverbs, in Psalms, where we know how we need to deal with things, how we need to listen, how we need to talk, and when we need to talk. And it's all come with the renewal of the mind. So the mind is there, the control. So is our thinking, or the way we're thinking, it's positive? And does it line up? Does that book line up with our Christian life?
I don't know the book. I haven't seen it. If it's along these lines, a lot of this is, one of the things when you really dig into the wisdom of the fathers, a lot of it is just common sense. Really.
Right, but where can we get the common sense from?
Well, it's kind of the collective wisdom of the culture. And a lot of this stuff is, really, you find the same stuff dealt with in secular psychology, as well as within the religious context. And the next part of the talk this morning is going to be taking it more into the sphere of the spiritual. But all of this, especially about our inner reaction, is basically. This is just patristic psychology, which is kind of the common wisdom of certainly of the fathers, but it's still kind of also the common wisdom of the culture, if we just know it. But we can read all of these things. There's nothing we can't read. We just need to read it critically and see, is this something helpful or is this something that's not helpful?
So when that book, Secret, talks about the Lord of Attraction, which is in your mind, you could attract all good thing and you can attract all bad thing to yourself with the way you're thinking. With the way you're thinking, but the way you're thinking is what you're feeding your mind.
Right. And
with.
and we need to be careful with what we
While
feed
we're
our mind
feeding
with.
our mind.
And I think one of the things it's very interesting now in contemporary psychology. There's this whole therapy that's developed, which is very much in line with the whole patristic vision, which is called cognitive therapy. It's used for depression. It's used for it works wonders with depression, actually, and as well as even obsessive compulsive disorders, and they're even using it for personality disorders like borderline personality and things, which is basically being attentive to your thoughts and recognizing which thoughts are disordered, which thoughts are basically lies. For example, if you're obsessing about I'm worthless and I can't do anything and powerless, and basically indulging in a grand orgy of self-pity, you can say, wait a second, this is not helpful. I'm not going to think like this. These thoughts are not true, and you can go through and even contradict these thoughts. Now, this is basically the same method that you find in the Philokalia, and in much of the patristic tradition of this going through and being attentive to your thoughts. And what this practice is in our tradition is called watchfulness or nepsis, and that watchfulness has two aspects of it. The first is watchfulness to maintain our consciousness of the awareness, our consciousness of God, the awareness of His presence. The second aspect of that is to maintain watchfulness over our thoughts, so that we can edit out and let go those thoughts that are not constructive and not useful. I can't address that particular book, and some of the language that you are using about it is I'm unaware of, so I can't really address that. But it sounds like there are probably some very good things in it. But just read it critically and see if it's something that if there are valuable things that you can take from it, and if it's in line with the tradition of the teaching of the Church.
All right. Thank you.
You talked earlier about when you feel insulted at somebody's hands, to say, you hurt my feelings when fill in the blank.
Well, when you said this,
That's right.
I felt...
Right. Yeah, I was wondering, because as I've been reading the scriptures lately, it's been hearing and seeing when Jesus is exasperated, he asks a question, like, why do you tempt me to the people who are, trying to entangle him, and like the Pharisees are trying, or how is it you have no faith, or things like that. When somebody directly insults us, is there any use for us saying, why would you ask me a question like that, or why would you insult me like that?
Not usually, unless you want to get into an argument. It's usually better to just step back and not allow yourself to react. Because if somebody's trying to get you into an argument, well, then if you probably their passions are all geared up, and so you're not going to be hitting that person. You're going to be hitting their passions. And so you have to use your discretion as to what's discretion is the highest form of valor, or something like that was the old saying. So it's just a matter of looking to see what's going to be the most constructive way that I can respond in this situation. And if somebody comes up and deliberately insults you, then you might ask within yourself, well, why would he say that? Immediately forgiving and not letting it become an obstacle, but recognizing, this person is upset for some reason, and once they've calmed down, maybe we can get to the bottom of it. In other words, it's there's very constructive things about disengagement, so that you can really do things in a thoughtful way instead of just letting your passions react. Now, is this? Do you have any? Are there any more questions right now?
I just want to make a comment about
Sure.
these books. And
Sure.
You were talking. You mentioned common sense as common sense is common sense no matter where it comes from.
Right.
And that's true. I think, however, especially with so many of the self-help books and positive thinking books and stuff that we hear about and read about, it's important, very important to do as you say, to read it critically, judge it by the gospel, judge it by the tradition of the church, and remember that, like even when we read the Philokalia and others of these things from our own tradition, remember the context in which all those are written and intended to be received in. Just to put it this way, positive thinking has its place. Mm-hmm. We know that the thoughts are important and so forth and so on. But when it's man-centered positive thinking, it's off base. Exactly. You're going to hit a wall and you're going to hit it hard and you're going to fall because we need the grace of God. Mm-hmm. We need that communion with God in order for all of this to really work. I mean, it may work to a certain extent, ignoring all that, but certainly for us, we cannot divorce it from that because we know common sense is wisdom.
Exactly.
And real wisdom comes from God.
Exactly.
No matter where we find it. Mm-hmm. But it can be mixed with other things if we're looking at sources outside of the faith. And so that if we approach things that way, I mean, all of us, I think, have learned things outside of the church that are true and that are good. But we have to be careful of the baggage that may come with some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to ask, to avoid reacting, would it be a good tool to use the Jesus Prayer to do that?
The Jesus Prayer is extremely valuable to not react.
What was that?
The Jesus Prayer is extremely valuable as a tool. And that's really kind of that's the direction we're going in right now. Okay? No other questions right this second? Oh, Father, yes.
Forgive me if I'm jumping ahead. Absolutely, we all agree about the non-reaction, and especially as pastors. I mean, I remember once in a council meeting, they asked me some question, and I just take a deep breath, and they go, there he goes again, thinking about it, I'm trying to say a prayer, do I react now or wait? So the non-reaction is beautiful, but there comes a point where out of love we do have to have this constructive response, and I think Father Michael just addressed that. We need the church for that. Exactly. We need God, we need Christ, we need the Holy Spirit, we need our Father Confessor, we need the patristics. So whether it's just a deep breath, mm-hmm. or whether it's a day or a week or a month before we respond, and it may be a very painful response, but we have to know that when we do that, we're stepping into the fire. I mean, we are standing now in the presence of the one who maybe really did hurt us, and we still are human, and we have to be very careful when we react back to maybe our child, our spouse, mm-hmm. the bishop, the priest, and so that, if we bring that kind of reaction to it, it almost always goes well, but we can't control their reaction, but it's pretty scary, and I think if we just do it with, ourselves, with a book, mm-hmm. I don't know that that's sufficient. I think we really must be, in the church and in her wisdom to have that loving response. And it takes a lot of bravery and courage to have that constructive response. I don't know. Maybe that's part of the rest of the talk.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And what is that? What is that loving response? It's one ultimately that we arrive at with prayer, and with an attitude of love and compassion for the other person. If somebody's all upset, they're all upset, and so what are we called to do? Are we called to get upset back and get upset with them, or would it be more helpful to show them compassion and love, and to help and to see, and if there is a way to try and console them, and if there's not a way at that moment, to at least pray for them in love rather than allow ourselves to become angry and resentful for their response. Please.
Thank you for this speech today. We learn there is voluntary and involuntary reaction. Like if we burn, it's involuntary, our reaction. There are sometimes we choose to be voluntary. I was in a situation, probably different culture, religion, try to help a little toddler. I thought she belonged to this house, but turned out she's to the next house, and all Korean, and there's other lady, different culture with me, and they all bawled out on me. And I found myself banging the car. There's no way to get the point. I want this child to go to her house. It's there are points, there's no way to not react.
Well, and sometimes when we find ourselves in reaction, all that we can do is repent. Because that's the other thing that's really important. When we find ourselves, okay, it's overwhelmed us, it's gotten out of control, and and I'm getting angry, and I'm getting frustrated, and I'm getting, and so we can bring ourselves back to a point and say, I don't want to get angry and frustrated. Lord, help me, forgive me. Because we have to recognize our own weakness, and we have to accept our own weakness, and we're going to fall. And if we think we're not going to fall, we're in great delusion. And it's the great delusion of pride and arrogance. And so we should know we're going to fall. We should know we're going to we're weak. And finally, the fathers tell us even not to trust ourselves. Yeah. Because we, if we truly know ourselves, then we know that we're weak and we're likely to fall. But we still need to try. We still need to try to do the right thing and to reconcile and to maintain peace.
Also, we are in different kind of mentality, culture. I could. In the family, everyone, we have different personality, and I have my neighbor, and we have workmate, we have churchmate, and it's sometimes I could feel what my sister how might react, and I could learn from what you taught. But there are some shocked, unexpected, not expected. I don't know how long it'll take to think. So I don't know how in general, the priests, they have, their tone doesn't go up or down. They always say, no feature, no. I don't know how they do it.
Some of us are better at it than others. So.
I hope, I have two quick questions, and I hope the answers are short. First, is there anything worth fighting for? The answer is absolutely no. And the second, how would you comment on the role of humor in dissolving the acute situation of some sort?
Well, yes, there are things worth fighting for. But it depends on how do you fight for them. That's the question. And humor can be very valuable. Ultimately, we take ourselves so seriously, and we need to not take ourselves quite so seriously. And so often when we get upset, it's over things that are just so incredibly petty. And if we could just step back and look at it and say, I'm really making a fool of myself. And it's really quite amusing. Or it's really quite funny. That I would get upset over such triviality. Then maybe we can a bit more in reality. Because getting upset over all this pettiness that we do, and that's not really being in reality. So it's just drama, and it's all about attracting attention to myself, and that's nonsense. Mm-hmm.
Father Jonah, thank you for listening to our questions, and please forgive my ignorance. Regarding what was said about reactions due to differences, whether it's culture or it's personality, if we have the time or we can train ourselves to step back and see what we have in common, and respond starting from that common point. Is that an answer to this type of reaction? And if so, how can we train ourselves to do that?
Well, amen. I think that is the answer. We have to... when we're looking at differences, either cultural differences or interpersonal differences, there's no need for it to become a point of conflict. We can if we can step back and see, okay, these things are the same issues being approached from different perspectives, and maybe try and see those perspectives. And appreciate those perspectives, because people are bringing, like with the little girl or the little child who was wandering around the neighborhood and who was lost, and you had three people from three totally different cultural backgrounds. One is coming to it from a background maybe of, I don't know, where it was horribly dangerous for a little child to be on the street. Another was coming from a background where it's normal for a little child to be on the street, and because they know that everybody in the neighborhood is looking out for him. And another is approaching it from still a different perspective, is that maybe the mother is frantic over what happened to the 2-year-old, and so to be able to look at all of those things and to approach it in a manner of that's loving and respectful. If we can approach each other in a matter, with love and respect, and trying to appreciate where the other person is coming from, then huge amounts of conflict would be reduced. And rather than allowing our emotions to carry us along, think rationally. Well, what's going on here, and how can I be constructive within this? But love is as Christians, our whole everything revolves around love of the neighbor. How can I manifest the love of God to my neighbor? Joanna, you had a question?
Father Jonah, 2 questions. One thing that I struggle a lot with, and I think not only because of obvious pride, but at a much deeper level, is the cyclical nature of the spiritual struggle. How I slip back, and I have times when, during Lent, for instance, or at times of trial when I have to wake up, I feel like I'm waking up from a deep sleep. Mm-hmm. And where was my watchfulness? Mm-hmm. I was obviously not into nepsis. I was inept. Mm-hmm. So
that's good.
So, I'm reading this book by Elder Porphyrios, Wounded by Love, and he mentions Satan using machinations of the mind, and which is the cognitive distortions that psychology points out too. So, this watchfulness is so difficult to maintain. I find that it's so mixed with our nature. Not in an ontological way, but it's just so habitual not to be alert. That just reminding ourselves of this value of being awake spiritually is tremendous and so difficult. I spoke with an abbess recently, and she looked at me when I was telling her about some pathetic reactions I had had, and she said, "You will die soon." So I guess remembrance of death is helpful in watchfulness. So any thoughts on this? And then a second question, also Elder Porphyrios in this book mentions a form of indifference when he talks about these distortions of the mind that he says the devil uses, but obviously it's our own cooperation with it. He says it is the art of arts to learn this holy indifference. And he speaks of not reacting to the thoughts, to these logismi. So anyway, these are my two questions.
Well, one of the biggest traps that we put ourselves in, is sometimes we blame the devil or we blame our nature for all of these things. And in reality, it's actually our passions and our habits of reacting. Because if it's our nature, then we have an excuse. But if it's our habit, we don't have an excuse. And the reality is, it's our habits, and we don't have an excuse. So we can, but it is hard, and it does seem natural. It does seem a part of our ingrained nature. But the whole point of the spirit of this, looking at this as a spirit in context of spiritual discipline, is that we can bring it under control. And we don't have to allow ourselves to be tortured by our reactions and by our passions. And that the way to do this is precisely nepsis, is precisely this watchfulness. And it's hard, and it takes a long, long time, and we're going to fall. But when we fall, if you fall down, what do? Do you sit there and wallow in it? Oh, I fell down. Oh, it's poor me. Oh, it's horrible. No, you get right back up, you brush yourself off, and you keep going, right? And that's the whole point. We're going to fall. We're sinful. We're going to fall. Sometimes we're going to be watchful. Sometimes we're going to be in absolute hypnosis. We're going to be in absolute kind of obliviousness. And that's just our fallen condition. It's not our nature; it's our condition. But the more that we can roll that back, and just looking at the little victories, it's encouraging. We can be more and more watchful over ourselves. We can keep striving, and the more that we do that, the more that we strive, the more that we open ourselves to God. And in fact, the more that we open ourselves to awareness of God's presence, to that consciousness of God's presence, the greater that watchfulness will be. Now, sometimes we'll fall. We will fall. That's because, and all that is doing is saying, okay, I still have farther to go. Don't beat yourself up over it. If you fall, if you're walking along and you fall on the sidewalk and you lay there and say, I fell, oh, I'm such a bad person, oh, I'm so hopeless, I'm so incompetent, I'm on and on and on and on and on and on and on, you're not going to get to your destination. Okay? But if you get up and brush yourself off and say, "Oh, I fell. Oh, so what?" Keep going. And that's the way it is with so many of our transgressions. It's sometimes the sin is not the sin; it's what we do with it in our minds. If we've fallen away from watchfulness and then start beating ourselves up over it and become discouraged and just dump the spiritual life altogether because we've become so discouraged, then you've taken a little sin and magnified it into something huge. Or you get into a fight with somebody in church and you say, "Oh, I shouldn't have done that, and it's horrible." And well, rather than humbling yourself and apologizing and trying to make amends and go on with it, and instead you leave the church and you've taken a little sin and made it into something huge and tremendously self-destructive. And that's what a lot of this kind of self-resentment and self-recrimination and self-loathing does. We take other people's sins. And the thing is, if somebody hurts us or tries to hurt us or offends us and or does something inappropriate, whatever it is, or abusive, that's their sin. And we need to say, okay, that person sinned. But do I need to take that sin and magnify it against myself and continue to and take his sin against himself and turn it into something huge against myself, which I perpetuate, which is what resentment is. So we need to stop that process. Now, what I want to talk about next is the practice of inner stillness, which leads to greater experience of watchfulness. So,
I just wanted to say that how you said it to remember and be aware of God's presence made me think of watchfulness is awakening to the memory of being watched by God and being in God's loving sight.
Mm-hmm.
So just remembering we are watched with love.
Indeed. So.
How could the person feel the shortcoming? Sometimes it sounds ambiguous to feel the difference between resentful or this is logic. I don't want to deal with this person because he's not doing good. That we see it like it's logic. However, it might be resentful. How can that person feel the difference? How can I see my image? How do I look like?
Well, I think it depends on the particular thing that you're talking about. If you're talking about somebody who's like it was brought up about a bad a housing contractor or builder who did a bad job. Well, if you hate and if you come to hate the person and to think this is a bad person and this is he's evil and damned and all of this kind of stuff, then because he did a bad job building the house, then that's the wrong thing. But if you say, well, this guy's workmanship is not very good, and I made a mistake, and he may be a fine guy, but I don't want to work with him anymore. It's a whole different kind of thing. One is constructive, common sense, and if you really I maybe say, tell him, okay, look, guy, you need to go and take some lessons on how to do this. You did a bad job and you need to take responsibility for that. That's all right. It's all right. It's all right to force people. Well, not to force, but to try and get people to take responsibility for their own actions and for their own misdeeds. There's nothing wrong with that. especially in something like we were just talking about, that kind of example. But to judge the person on and to resent and hate and bear bitterness towards a person is never helpful. Is never constructive. And the other thing that it does is it puts you into a victim mode. And this victim mode, this is especially common when with abuse. What happens is that you essentially give that person all the power, and you assume a position of powerlessness, and which means not only which means that you can't take responsibility even for your own reaction. He made me feel like this. Okay, what do you do with that? He did this and I felt like this. Well, that's something that I can change. But if you're made to do something, he made me feel like this. He made me feel like I'm worthless. Well, you've accepted. You've given him power over you, and given him the. So that you can't do anything about it yourself. But rather, when you see that it's your own reaction, you can take responsibility for that reaction and said, yes, in that situation I felt powerless, but I'm not going to allow myself to continue to do that. You see, there's a huge difference. So dealing with things in a constructive way, or dealing with things in a way that's usually self-destructive.
Just to add to that, Father, I think a lot of this comes down to understanding and seeking the grace from God to have some wisdom, exercise some discernment. Mm-hmm. As you say, there's a difference between rejecting and condemning another person that, let's just say, somehow personality-wise or whatever, political, maybe you have divergent political views. Your interaction with them is going to be, as almost always, confrontational, acrimonious, is difficult. It may be wise to have less interaction with them.
Yep.
It's just but nevertheless, to be good to them whenever we're with them, to be polite, to be respectful, to pray for them, to wish them well. But there are some people that we come across in our lives that it just may not be very healthy for us to have a lot of intimate conversations with them, or much to work with them in your case.
Exactly.
And therefore, even St. Paul says, in Corinthians, not to associate with people who are X, Y, and Z, and he's talking about within the church. So there is that kind of, but it's never, it should not be out of anger or hatred or resentment or any of that. It's just a matter of, this is best for his salvation and for my salvation, for things to be, sometimes I tell people at confession, love them from a distance.
Yes. Or as the old saying goes, discretion is the better part of valor. Okay. So, do y'all want to stretch? It looks like everybody wants to stretch for a few minutes. Let's stretch for a few minutes.
If you've enjoyed this lecture, please consider a donation to the Monastery of St. John of San Francisco. You can contact the monastery at www.monasteryofstjohn.org.